It is officially the NFL offseason for the majority of NFL teams, and it is now time to improve rosters so that these teams can get back to the postseason. Within the offseason, of course, comes free agency, where teams will spend a lot of money in hopes they are a player or two away from heavily competing for a Super Bowl. In today's video, we will break down 4 free agent signings from last year's free agent class and grade them based on how they performed in 2023. There will also be some grades at the end that we won't thoroughly discuss, but we will post letter grades for other players and teams too. There was a lot of money tossed around last offseason, and some of these deals didn't work out to say the least, but there is a lot to dive into in today's video. Now let's begin. We are starting today's video with the Raiders signing quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy was signed to a 3-year deal for $72 million, with $45 of that being guaranteed, and the hopes was he could lead this team to the playoffs after the team finished 6-11 in 2022. I wasn't the biggest fan of this signing because I don't think Jimmy is a good quarterback, and despite the troubles the Raiders had in 2022, believe it or not, they finished 12th in points per game with Derek Carr at quarterback. Things did not improve in 2023 as they would finish 23rd in points per game and average nearly 4 less points per game offensively, and a lot of that was due to Jimmy. Jimmy didn't make it a full season and in fact was benched on Halloween in favor of rookie Aidan O'Connell. This move happened on the same day Josh McDaniels was fired, and this was the summarization of the first half of the Raiders season. Jimmy wasn't good, Josh of course wasn't good, and 2 negatives at the NFL level does not make a positive. With Jimmy as their starting quarterback, they put up 20 points or more in a game just once, which was in a game against the Patriots, and against a team that would go on to finish with the number 3 overall draft pick. Jimmy threw at least 1 interception in every game he started, as he technically threw a pass in the Week 18 finale against the Broncos, but as we know, he did not start that game. What particularly stinks for the Raiders is Jimmy isn't exactly cuttable either because of the contract he signed. He will have a cap hit of $28.5 million in 2024, and because of the guarantees, he has a cap hit of $28.3 million, meaning the Raiders would save just $200,000 by cutting him at the cost of over $28 million. Translation, they probably won't cut him, and if they do, they have to eat a huge chunk of their salary cap. I was never a fan of this signing because entering the 2023 season, you knew you would have to compete with Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert in your division, and I really thought this was a half-ass effort of an attempt to say to the fan base, guys, we're trying, knowing full well Jimmy has never been an elite quarterback at any point in his career, and that somehow, someway, Jimmy was going to lead this team to double-digit wins, and ultimately their first playoff win since 2002. If there is any saving grace to this signing, it's that the Raiders roster itself isn't star-filled, and there's not 6 or 7 guys to pay $20+ million to like the 49ers do, for example. Yes, they of course have Max Crosby and Davante Adams, and even Colton Miller at left tackle, but the Raiders aren't able to pay superstars now because of this contract, at least meaning that's not a hindrance of this deal. Just because that is the case doesn't mean the Raiders get a free pass from this signing, because they had the 7th overall pick last year, and if they wanted to go up to pick 3 with Arizona, who traded the pick to Houston, who had pick 12, so that the Raiders could go get Anthony Richardson, well, they very easily could have. Jimmy finished the year with a little over 1,200 passing yards, 7 passing touchdowns, and 9 interceptions, while having the lowest passer rating of his career. I wasn't surprised this is how the first year of his Raiders tenure went, because as time has went on, I think there's one thing we can agree on. Jimmy isn't a good quarterback. 1 year later, this is an F grade. The NFL is about the fans' experience, and the last time I went to a game, I didn't have tickets, and I couldn't find tickets, and I didn't have any good deals, and I wasn't sure if the seats I was even viewing were going to be good. And you shouldn't have to worry about that the next time you go to a big event, and with Game Time, you don't have to. And with killer last-minute deals, views from your seat, all-in prices, meaning you don't have to worry about this fee or that fee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And what I love about Game Time is how easy it is to use the app. They have views from every seat in the house, so there is no confusion as to what you're buying, and one game I am considering going to is the AFC Divisional Round game when the Ravens play at home at M&T Bank Stadium. Hopefully we have a little Flacco Lamar action in that game, but that is one game as a Marylander that I am heavily considering going to. Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind when purchasing tickets. They're obsessed with saving you money on purchasing tickets, and they even have deals right up to the start of the event. So download Game Time and use code ANALYSIS for $20 off your first purchase. Again, download Game Time, use code ANALYSIS, ANALYSAS for $20 off your first purchase. So download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. Next up is the Falcons signing of safety Jessie Bates, who came over after playing for the Bengals for 5 years and was signed to a 4-year, $64 million deal. Bates was given $36 million guaranteed, and the thought process behind this signing was pretty simple. The 2022 Falcons finished 25th in passing yards allowed, 23rd in passing touchdowns allowed, and only snagged 10 interceptions as a team in 17 games. The 2023 Falcons, on the other hand, improved in a big way as they finished 8th in passing yards allowed this year. Yes, they finished 22nd in passing touchdowns allowed, but that was not due to the play of Jessie Bates. This stat is kind of hilarious in itself, but the Falcons finished 27th in interceptions as they had 8 as a team in 2023. That may sound bad until you realize Jessie Bates had 6 of the team's 8 interceptions, with Nathan Landman pulling down 1 and Richie Grant pulling down the other. The Falcons finished the 2023 season with a 7-10 record and had a pretty disappointing year, which culminated in the firing of now former head coach Arthur Smith. They finished 26th in points per game despite investing 3 top 8 draft picks in skill position players over the past few years, and despite all of the negatives for Atlanta in 2023, like quarterback play, Jessie was not one of them. In fact, Bates had the best year of his career in Atlanta and made the Pro Bowl for the NFC. He finished the year with 132 total tackles, 6 interceptions, which was good for 3rd in the league behind only DaRon Bland of the Cowboys and Geno Stone of the Ravens, and even tacked on 3 forced fumbles and 3 tackles for a loss. Jessie has a career rate of 12.2% of missing tackles, and he trimmed it all the way down to 7.1% in 2023, and per PFF, had the highest defensive grade for any safety in all of football, narrowly edging Bucs safety Antoine Winfield Jr. For a player to pull down 75% of a team's interceptions in any year is pretty ridiculous, because it shows how good of a year they had, but it also kind of shows how not great the rest of the team was. Even if Atlanta was sweating this signing 1 year later, which they obviously aren't, and I think you could make a case that Bates is underpaid relative to the production he just gave Atlanta in 2023, the contract itself is very friendly for both sides. Atlanta is still on the hook for over $26 million in guarantees for 2024 and beyond, but even if Bates didn't play well or had an injury-filled 2023 season, that money for Atlanta is not the end of the world because Bates would still contribute something. It's a little different with Jimmy and the Raiders because of how noticeable the impact of having even Aiden O'Connell at quarterback versus Jimmy G is. This is a friendly deal for both sides as Atlanta gets one of the best safeties in all of football, while Bates is a top 5 highest paid player at his position. A lot of the time you hear about bad deals in free agency, especially the higher paid contracts, because it's what a lot of people talk about and what franchises should not do, and for the Falcons specifically, you often hear about how they underutilize the hell out of their best players, and they do, but this was a tremendous signing for both sides here. This is an easy A+ grade. Next up is Mike McGlinchey of the Broncos, who signed a 5-year deal worth $87.5 million, with $52.5 million being guaranteed. Despite the Broncos' shortcomings towards the end of the year, they had nearly all 5 starting offensive linemen play for all 17 games, which is a pretty rare feat in itself. Mike was placed in IR before the final game of the year, and with him playing 16 games, or 15 and some change, because he was injured in the Week 17 game against the Chargers, we have enough Broncos tape of him to grade his play and ultimately this signing 1 year later. We are going to read some stats from Mike this year, but it is important to remember a few things regarding this. Russ does not make it easy for his offensive linemen to stand out and to look good on the stat sheet from a pressures allowed perspective because of how he plays quarterback. If you block for Russell Wilson, chances are you will allow more pressures and you will allow more quarterback hits and sacks for that matter too, because Russ likes to camp out back there and oftentimes take sacks that should never happen. It's not like this every single play, of course, but there is context needed for the numbers we are about to read. Mike finished the 2023 season by allowing 49 pressures on 569 pass blocking snaps, which was by far a career high, as the most pressures he allowed in a season prior to 2023 was 39 back in his rookie year. He had 9 penalties in 2023, which was the second most in his career to the 10 he had in 2022. The 49 pressures Mike allowed in 23 were good for 7th most in the NFL, and again, what is important to remember is not every pressure allowed is created equal. However, what I will say about Mike is that even during his time in San Francisco, he wasn't the best player, and there was never a point in time where he was a top 2 or 3 player at his position, or that was even a conversation. I wasn't a big fan of this contract because of how much cap space Russ was already taking up, and given they made a player who is not an elite tackle, the 8th highest paid tackle in all of football. I respected Denver for going to get McGlinchey, as 2022 was an absolute nightmare for Denver, and they had to do something to try and get better for 2023. Ultimately, they did get better, but that doesn't mean I love this contract. They have intentions to release Russ, and Mike is still owed nearly $30 million no matter how you slice it, and he will turn 29 this offseason. He's not exactly a spring chicken, and it's going to take a pretty big year for Mike to turn this contract around and make it worthwhile. I completely understand Mike's decision to sign this contract, as there were 87.5 million reasons to, and San Francisco could not afford everybody. But, and this is a big but, there's a reason they were okay with letting Mike walk. I think Mike is an okay player and is overpaid, but there's significantly worse contracts out there, and Denver had to do something entering the season. I completely understand why this signing happened, but I wasn't the biggest fan, and 1 year later, this is a D+ grade. Next up is Derek Carr signing a 4-year, $150 million deal with the Saints, and there is a lot of context to this signing. I would like to credit Derek for finishing the year strong, as the Saints put up 22 or more points in each of the final 6 games of the year, but it was brutal prior to that. In the final 4 games, Derek made his numbers look a lot better than we saw from him for most of 2023, and his end-of-the-year numbers honestly don't look that bad. He threw 12 touchdowns in the final 4 games, but in the first 13 games of the year, he had just 2,880 yards and 13 touchdowns, along with 7 interceptions. He was averaging 221 passing yards and 1 passing touchdown per game for the first 13, before averaging 249.5 yards and 3 passing touchdowns per game in each of the final 4. Derek had as many multi-passing touchdown games in the first 13 games with 4 as he did in the final 4 games of the year, which was also 4. What needs to be remembered here is the Saints signed Derek thinking this was the missing piece, and that he was going to propel them to an NFC South title in what was already one of the weakest, if not the weakest, divisions in all of football. Sure, the Saints finished the year on a good note and ultimately finished with a winning record, but does it matter? Did you pay Derek Carr $150 million for moral victories to take into the following year? No. None of Carr's stat lines from any individual games look particularly bad, but Saints fans will be the first to tell you how frustrated they were with Derek at points this year, even despite the strong finish. There were countless times Saints fans wanted offensive coordinator Pete Carmichael fired, and I get it, but 1 year after this signing, I still don't think Derek Carr is the answer. I didn't think he was then, and I don't think he is now. I thought the Saints should have been sellers last offseason and embraced being bad for 1 year and have the opportunity to enter the 2024 draft to get one of the top quarterbacks. But they didn't, and they're stuck with Derek Carr. And 1 year later, I don't think the Saints are any closer to winning a Super Bowl than they were prior to the Carr signing. I think an F grade is too harsh for this signing because Derek wasn't anywhere close to as bad as Jimmy, but the goal was to win a Super Bowl and the Saints missed the playoffs. Having said that, 1 year later, this grade is a C-. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please like and subscribe. It's only about 36% of people watching are subscribed, and it helps the channel tremendously. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.